Okay, this is Steam Next Fest, February 2023. If you watched my previous Steam Next Fest video, you know that all the games that I picked out suck, and it wasn't a very good video, I guess. But this time I have 5 games. They're definitely better than the previous ones, but here we go. Okay, first up we have Meatgrinder, which is a fast-paced first-person shooter inspired by the likes of Clustertruck and Mad Max. What we have here is a nice kind of outline for a good FPS. It's fast-paced and it has a lot of explosions and enemies and all that kind of stuff, but it's just lacking a lot in some terms of gameplay, such as there's really no point in killing enemies since you can skip past pretty much the entire level without killing a single person, but also you could cheese the combat pretty easily. You get a grapple and also a kick, and they're a little too effective at taking out enemies. It only takes about one shot with either of those things to actually take an enemy out, and surprisingly enough, your guns sometimes take more than that. During this demo, you get 3 different weapons to try out: dual pistols, dual shotguns, and a minigun. All these weapons are pretty nice in handling, but once again, like I said before, they're just a little ineffective. Though there are some desirable, unique traits to this game, such as to regenerate health, you have to constantly keep moving and keep your heartbeat up. Although it's not much of a challenge, it still keeps you on your feet. The soundtrack's a nice touch too, it's very intense, and it can be described in one sentence: the masculine urge to destroy everything in your path. There's plenty of fun to be had here, but I just think the developers probably need to add a little more depth to the game. Otherwise, I think it's pretty solid. Anyway, this game comes out during the second quarter of this year. Next up, we have I Did Not Buy This Ticket, which is a visual novel whose main selling point, at least in my opinion, is either the visual style, which is very unique and surreal, or its psychological horror aspect. We play as a girl who's an insomniac, and she also mourns at funerals as a hobby, I guess. One day after a funeral, she digs up a random bus ticket that she did not buy, of course, just like the title of the game. Yeah, I'm sure you guessed that, but anyway, she doesn't really know where the bus is taking her or anything like that, but I'm sure that this is no normal bus trip and she'll probably encounter some horrors beyond her imagination, but this demo doesn't really show much of that. We kind of just get on the bus, sit down, and then the conductor comes around and harasses us for falling asleep. So this demo really isn't much of anything, to be honest, and I wish it showcased a little more of what this game is really capable of portraying, but I guess we'll have to wait until the release. You also get an achievement for completing this demo, which is kind of cool, and it's probably the first time I've seen that. And as of right now, the game has no official release window, so we don't know yet when the game is going to be released. Editor's Hell is probably my least favorite on this list, but it's inspired by the likes of Papers, Please. You play as a person that has inherited their uncle's newspaper business after he's passed away, and must now manage the newspaper by creating titles and editing articles to best fit what you'd like to be published out there. It's trying to be intricate in too many ways, I feel. You can edit the titles, and you can either have them oppose or be apologetic towards the government, or completely neutral. It's your choice. But then you're able to retract certain parts of the article to shine a light on certain aspects of the government or whatever you want. But it doesn't really feel like it's making a difference to the article overall. Once you've completed an article, you have to assign an employee to write it for you. each employee has their own opinion on both the government and the news, so you kind of have to make an article for each one each day. But sometimes your employees just don't want to take a certain article for certain reasons that they won't state. So you either have to change the article or you have to force them to do it and risk them losing trust in you. Once you've published the papers, you're now in charge of distributing them as well. You're given a map of every single town in the country, and each of them have their own political leanings. Based on what leaning your own newspaper has, you should probably put them into whatever towns agree with you. I didn't see a difference at all whether I put the paper in a neutral or a opposition or a government town, so I'm not really sure if that system is fully working at the moment. And then after that, you're taken home where you have to pay bills and heating and food and stuff like that. Once again, something that's completely borrowed from Papers, Please. And if you have less than a certain amount of money at the end of the week, you go bankrupt. But luckily enough for me, the demo ended before I could go bankrupt, even though I was very far below the threshold for bankruptcy, according to the game. Overall, Editor's Hell is very boring and very disappointing, and it is set to come out during the first quarter of this year. Shadows of Doubt is probably the coolest and most well-made game on this list. It's an immersive sim where you play as a detective going around and solving various cases. During the demo, you get a murder case, but in the full game, apparently, each case can be auto-generated by the game itself, so no two are the same. And of course, you'll notice in this footage that the game is very voxel, pixel-like, but it is very good looking. I mean, just in this opening sequence, you can see there's so much going on. And my computer was struggling. There's the rain particles, and then there's all the people walking around, and the reflections and all that. It's a very good-looking game, actually. And believe it or not, the game actually procedurally generated the city for me. Right now in the demo, there aren't too many options for customizing the city that can be generated, but it did look very good, and for the most part the design was functional at best. But it just has so many telltale signs of a well-designed game. I mean, seriously. There's so many different ways to approach your cases, and there are so many layers upon layers of depth to how the NPCs and the world around you works. Honestly, if you ask me, Cyberpunk needs to take notes from this game. But anyway, there are some elements of stealth involved as well, where you can go into apartments and collect evidence. But eventually, the police may show up and you'll have to make your escape, preferably out a window or maybe even an air vent. I'm sure everybody's experience with this game is different on each playthrough, but I'll go ahead and describe my own experience here during this demo. Which this demo is apparently so good that they had to put a time limit on it. You can only play it for an hour and a half before it'll just time out. But anyway, I was going about the case as usual, and I found the dead body of a person in their apartment, and eventually the cops showed up. I escaped through the air vent, and I decided to go all the way up to the roof through the air vents. At least I tried. Eventually, I did get lost in the air vents, and because they're air vents, they're cold, and so my character was getting cold, and he kept shaking violently to show it. Because he had to rub it in, apparently. But I finally came across an air vent after being cold for a couple minutes, and I just decided to drop down. I didn't see anybody. And I was like, oh, this is safe. Nobody's in the room here. Drop down. Oh, there's a woman about to go to bed. She shuts off the lights as I'm dropping down into the thing, and I was like, oh, maybe she won't see me in the darkness. She saw me in the darkness, and I tried getting out of the apartment, and she got violent, and I beat the living crap out of her, and now she's knocked out in her apartment. So I leave before the cops show up if anybody witnessed that or any cameras saw me trespassing. And so I went back around my business of investigating the case. I go to a diner that apparently the victim was at earlier that day. I gained access to their security system so I could see if on the CCTV it had captured the victim as well as some other person with them. I couldn't find the victim for the life of me, so eventually I just left the diner and went exploring on my own. I didn't find much, but the game still looks good, and I got to talk to some rude people that wouldn't even tell me their name. So I decided to just knock on somebody's door. Nobody that I knew in particular, just some random person's door. I knocked and somebody yelled saying they would be coming to the door, and they never opened the door, and it sounded like they were loading a gun on the other side of the doors. So I decided to skedaddle, and yeah, that's pretty much my experience. But honestly, this game has some real promise, but at the moment it has no official release date yet. Lastly, we have Extreme Evolution Drive to Divinity. Now, this is a very interesting game, just visually, at least. The basic premise, though, is that the game is just a 3D platformer where you are able to change forms to do different platforming abilities. There are plenty of levels in this demo. It's actually pretty long. It'd probably take you a little over an hour to complete, I would guess. Even I wasn't able to complete it for this video. But anyway, you simply go from level to level in no certain order, collecting things and levels and forms to complete even more levels. I don't think there's really any story to this game at all, but it's a little... The visual style, of course, like I already said, is interesting. It's not unique, really. Cruelty Squad did this a couple years back, I think, but it's just this ugly, kind of 90s, early 2000s 3D graphics look with no real uniform texturing or anything like that. It's really mixed up and all that. And the visuals, I can get over, although I think eventually the graphics were... They were a little epilepsy-inducing, if you would call it that. Another thing, the music really stood out to me. I mean, once again, the music had no, uniform style or anything like that, but it was just very relaxing, because you have this really surreal game, and in the background you just have this kind of ambient, kind of a little creepy maybe at times, soundtrack in the background. It was a different experience and I liked it. It was like taking acid possibly, but it was something. The platforming itself is nothing, unique, but the different forms you're collecting are very weird and definitely fit the tone overall. You start out as an egg, and then you get a smaller, triangle form, but it's not exactly a pyramid, it's just weird. And then eventually you get, the more advanced ones, like you get a car, and all the car does is just drive forward really fast. Or you get just a block that does nothing. It's called the block of flesh, actually, and it does absolutely nothing. But yeah, the game is constantly kind of challenging you to use these forms to collect, those, to get on those platforms and collect those new levels, those new abilities. And the main way you're able to change into these different forms is with this fictional currency, which I don't really think has a name. It just has a symbol next to it. I'm not sure what that symbol is. Sorry. But anyway, Each time you have to change forms, it takes some of that away, and you have your own currency limit, which you can increase by collecting things on levels. You know, it's kind of a little bit of managing that kind of budget there. That's sometimes a challenge with these certain forms, because the later forms that I got during this demo, I noticed consumed a lot when, you know, I first deployed them. It's like you have this initial cost of deploying the form, and then, you know, after, if you have it active, it keeps costing that budget to keep you in that form. So it's very weird, kind of cool, you know. I'd like to play the full game. I'd probably play the full game. Who knows? Maybe I'll cover it on Autumn Skewer. But anyway, very different experience here. Not for everybody. Not for the epileptic. But Extreme Evolution Drive to Divinity comes out this September. So I guess look out for it when it drops.